And when I say forgiving, I don't mean that you put yourself in the position of being harmed again, but just recognize that everybody is operating with what tools they have, and not everyone has all the tools in their toolbox that they need. Some people are sicker than others, and some people have been badly abused and become abusers. It does not mean that you put yourself in the way of those abusers, but you don't let them occupy your mind and rent space that is full of hatred and vengeance and despair, difficulty, disorder. Because we're all supposed to be happy, and those things don't make you happy.
And they really do not. They hold us back. They hold us back in so many ways. Sophie, how do individuals know the difference between their imagination and their intuitive sense kicking in?
Boy, what a good question. That is a very profound question. And the only way to know is by experience, by testing your intuition constantly, and by being aware. How does intuition come to me? And it comes to different people in different ways. With some person, it will be a roiling of the gut. For another person, it'll be a thump of the heart, a sudden skipping a beat. For someone else, it's the hair rising on your arms. For someone else, it's an external voice, as if there were someone in the room with you. Those are rare, those occasions of the external voice, but they do happen. And they give information as clearly as if an angel were talking to you. How do you distinguish it from imagination? And I will extend the question and say, from the desires that you impose. Let us say that you see someone, let's say that you're a woman. You see a man across the room and you think, wow, I'd really like to know him. The next thing you have in your imagination, you're thinking, when we're married, he's going to be so kind. You've got yourself now in your imagination in your white dress going down the altar with him. You have 3 children. You're living in a little house, white picket fence. Everything is wonderful. He's a terrific husband and breadwinner, and everyone is happy. This is imagination, and you feel nice imagining it. Intuition, on the other hand, doesn't come like that. Intuition comes as seeing someone across the room and thinking, I'd like to know that man, or I'd like not to know that man. That's all that's said. They don't give you all the rest of the story. Intuition doesn't. Imagination gives you the rest of the story. Let's put it another way. You meet a man, you see a man at the doorway, and you think to yourself, whoa, the last thing I want is to have anything to do with him. I do not like that person at all. 2 years later, when you're married to him, because he has overridden all your objections with his sad story and with chocolates and with telling you how wonderful you are. And now 2 years later, as you're married to this man who you instinctively disliked, and as you were putting makeup on the bruises on your face from where he hit you, you think, I knew everything about that man when I saw him. When I first saw him, I knew everything, and I didn't listen. I overrode it. I have story after story in the art of intuition of this kind of overriding of our own instincts or intuitions. You have used the word energy time and again, and it's true. It's an energetic flash of knowing, but it's very frail sometimes. It's gossamer thin, and it doesn't last, and intellect can easily come in and override it with your reason. There's no reason in the world for me to dislike this man. Look, he's got a great job, he's handsome, he's well-dressed. His girlfriend, his last girlfriend, left him, but that isn't anything because lots of girlfriends meet other guys and leave them. There's nothing wrong here at all. I'll just do it. And then you ignore the warning signals and go ahead and get involved. Now, I spoke of the external voice. There's one story I tell in The Art of Intuition of a man, a photographer with the National Geographic, who wanted a publisher for his photographs, a book that he wanted to do of his photographs. He was walking in Hawaii on the beach, and he suddenly had an external voice in his ear say, "Give it to Mr. Blank." He didn't know this name at all, had never heard the name before. He went home and asked his sister, whom he was visiting in Hawaii, "Have you ever heard of Mr. Blank?" And she said, "Oh, yes, he's the head of a publishing house in Washington State. It's called XYZ Publishing." He wrote to XYZ Publishing, to Mr. Blank, and by golly, that was the man who published his book of photographs. I have that story from the publisher. So that's very different from imagination. Although you could think to yourself when you hear the external voice, you can, with your reason, think, "I just heard an external voice. That has to be my imagination. I will not listen." But he was wise enough to listen. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
I'll tell you where
ma'am.
the discernment becomes very difficult is when we have our own cultural conditioning. For example, we are taught, I say we, let's say there is a man who is taught as a little boy to distrust all people of a different color. So he distrusts all white people, all chocolate brown people, because he is Oriental himself, let's say. So he distrusts anyone of a different race. He meets someone at the door and doesn't know, am I making a judgment on the basis of my learned social conditioning prejudice that says that all white people, all black people are bad, or am I having a true intuition that this figure is off, is a little crazy, that I don't want anything to do with him? And you don't know. You have to really search your heart for that one and pray and consider it, because you need to be very clear of social conditioning. Maybe you grew up in a household where the father of the household flies into rages, and you have an instinctive aversion to angry men. They can hurt. And maybe the aversion even carries over to non-angry men, because they may get angry at any moment and flash out and hit you. You don't know. So when you meet someone, you you're traumatized by this early upbringing. And those are the conditions that make intuition extremely difficult. You have to untangle the trauma and the social conditioning, the culturally learned behavior or prejudice from a true intuition. And that's not always easy. That's what life is supposed to do to you. I mean, that's what we're supposed to get out of living. Somewhere between the ages of 20 and 40, you start learning this.
Indeed. Well, it reminds me of in your book when you talk about Joanne, and you talk about how your intuition could basically deceive you, and in essence, that's not intuition. But Joanne in the book proceeds to tell a story how she was in a doctor's office sitting next to a woman who, from her socialized perception, was disheveled, and she made judgment based upon her
her external appearance. Yes.
Yes, and then as time went on, and it was almost like they were forced to speak, and she began to speak to this woman, and she found out that she was actually a physicist.
A brilliant physicist, and Joanne, who was very brilliant herself, immediately had to redo her thinking. And she came to me and she said, that's an example, you see, where intuition wasn't right. Joanne is one of these people who does not trust her intuition. And I said, no, that was an example of your quick intellectual judgment, not of intuition. That was your intellect saying, this woman is disheveled and dirty and has a mustache. I don't like her. But it was not intuition. Intuition will come in a different way. It is so interesting, the whole thing about intuition. And they have done thousands, hundreds of thousands of studies, the scientists, and they come up with figures like the possibility of chance is 10 to the billion against 1 that you would be able to know this particular thing or have these intuitions. They know that psychic, paranormal, telepathic, clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient experiences are real, and the possibility of it being chance is zilch, and yet it is still not respectable, and still people say, well, don't trust your intuition, think logically. And mind you, I think logic is great, but it has its place, and I will always hope to trust my intuition, which is finer. In my experience, the intuition is always right. It will not tell you why. It will only tell you what to do. And afterwards, after you have followed its direction, you will discover that it was always for your benefit. Always. It will save your life, or it will give you some gift of joy. And it's nice to know that the universe wants us to be happy and is giving us things. Now, here's another example where discernment is difficult. I have never met a successful businessman who did not have hunches or take advantage of a gut decision. They do use their intuition. I sold the stock on a hunch, or I bought the stock on a hunch, things like that. But there are also gamblers who will not listen to intuition, but who believe that they are listening to it, and so they're going to play the games, but they become addicted to the game, and there the intuition has gone. They think they're using intuition, but they're using chance. And sometimes you can lose your shirt when you're doing that. So I just put in that caveat, because somebody will say, oh, the universe is not always on my side. I've gambled lots of times and lost. Yes, but I'm not talking about gambling. Once I went to the races. I was a little girl with my mother and my sister, and we went to the trotting races in Delaware. And just using the program, we began to bet among the three of us what horse would win. And there were 7 races. I chose 6 winners, and the 7th came in second, but that was because my sister, when I chose one of them, said, oh, that was the one I was going to choose. And so I chose the next horse, which was the one that